Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and this is a breakdown of X-Men 97 Episode 8, Tolerance is Extinction Part 1. This show is so damn good! And in this episode, we got sightings of Spider-Man, Doctor Doom, Zemo, Silver Samurai, Omega Red, Doctor Strange, What If Absolute Point Logic? Good lord, we gotta break this episode down frame by frame for all the Easter eggs and details you might have missed. This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform that makes launching your own website a breeze. Starting as always with the updates to the opening titles. For the first time this season, Professor X has been added back in with his title card because he returns this episode. And as in past weeks, we see the shot of Bishop with the alternate timeline Storm and Wolverine when they were lovers in an alternate timeline, fighting Nimrod. This is from the One Man's Worth arc, in which Bishop and his sister Shard team up with these two to prevent the assassination of Charles Xavier in 1959, a plot that was orchestrated by Fitzroy on behalf of Master Mold, who later sends Nimrod to see this through. One Man's Worth was one of the storylines Bo Cameo recommended that we rewatch before this final arc of X-Men 97, along with the Sanctuary arc, which gets recalled here with a shot of Magneto atop Asteroid M. This episode begins with Cable absolutely showering broken beer bottle glass on the X-Mansion lawn in the exact spot where Storm likes to picnic barefoot. Dude, put out a tarp. Jean tells Scott that when Bishop took baby Nathan into the future, they got separated in the time stream and that this baby landed in the future alone. In season 4, episode 18, Beyond Good and Evil Part 1, The End of Time, Bishop also got bumped off course in the time stream by Apocalypse. So this is just something that can happen when one is traveling through time. And we still do not know where Bishop is right now, or when he is. Bo Cameo has said repeatedly that there will be no time travel in these next two episodes and that Bishop is not coming back to help out. Scott wonders,
"Ever thought to ask the professor to show me how he did what he did so well? Be a father."
Ha! Ironically, Charles Xavier is the biological father to David Haller, Legion, and he wasn't really part of that kid's upbringing. In the Krakoa storyline, the two have a fraught relationship. Cable explains that Bastion uses the fallout from Genosha to get backing for his Prime Sentinel program.
The Prime Sentinels are created using the same techno-organic virus Sinister infected me with as a baby, rewriting their DNA.
And we get close-ups of Cyclops' eyepiece connecting with Jean's eyeline. We see the guilt of these two because not only did Scott doom his son Nathan, they supplied this future with a techno-organic virus that dooms them all. Cable's hollow projections include Bastion's evolutionary steps, from Nimrod to an intermediary step to his current human form, which looks like the textbook depictions of the evolution of humans from Neanderthals. We also see what appears to be the sacred timeline, with a few snaking branches as it appears in the Loki series. And when asked how X-Men 97 connects to the MCU multiverse from these other titles, Bo tweeted, "I think at this point we are merely using common language and are not necessarily connected on the same tree. Marvel and I wanted a word/concept that audiences were already familiar with instead of making our own, only for viewers to go, so it's like, what if?" And when it comes to the sacred timeline imagery, Bo said, "We definitely borrowed some iconography, again, stuff casual viewers and fans would be on some level of familiarity with." And then he went on to say, "I think it's very much dealer's choice on some levels. I know all my discussions were to view it as its own neighboring tree, not a branch of the multiverse MCU tree. Sure, a few leaves from one tree can mingle with another at some point." So later we get a close-up of this timeline graphic that labels different points of this history. On the far left, there are three icons. There's an illuminated X, and then circles that seem to show the heads of Professor X and Magneto. I'm gonna assume that this refers to where they are currently, right after the Genosha attack. But then when you slide to the right, there's another icon beneath the timeline that could be the mask of the Scarlet Witch or the original Marvel girl Jean Grey mask. If it's a Scarlet Witch mask, it could refer to an upcoming House of M split from the timeline. Or it could refer to a point where Dark Phoenix resurfaces, or just something involving the Phoenix. But then to the right of that, there's an icon that either is an animal paw or maybe a fire. I'm wondering if it's just Cable's label for Wolverine and how Wolverine tends to survive in all these post-apocalyptic futures like he did in the Days of Future Past one. So Cable says that Bastion's evolutionary war lasted 300 years. So this would be beyond the year 2055 when most of the future events take place, or anytime they go to Forge or Bishop's future. We're talking 2297, right? But that's still like before 3399 when like Cable was supposedly taken in the comics. Morph response,
"So another dystopia where Logan's the last to die."
Yes, they're referring to the events of the Days of Future Past in season 1 when all the X-Men except Wolverine are dead in the future. And what's interesting about that is if Morph or Wolverine or any of them knew about that, Bishop would have had to tell them about it because none of these timeline version characters were there prepare for that. Cable shows them Bastion's prime sentinel Utopia, a futuristic Moscow with St. Basil's Cathedral, but with towering skyscrapers and this elevated monorail. A monorail in Russia? And then an image of a cityscape that appears to be a mashup of a few different cities. The twisty glass building on the right, it looks like the Gherkin in London. And then on the left, it looks like the Sydney Opera House. And then there's also a statue of a man raising his arm while holding a small child. And then we see these two mutant slaves at a conveyor belt. These are the unnamed mutants in the year 2055 who join Wolverine in the season 1 Days of Future Past episodes. The guy's arms armoring up, similar to Garrison Kane, but it's not Garrison Kane. Both of these characters were just unnamed and original to the 90s run. And it's pretty impressive that these two made it through 2 different apocalypses. It looks as though they might be building Giza-style pyramids that we see in the background. Then we see this older version of Polaris as she floats over the planet, watching it with green energy waves, kind of like the Northern Lights. I assume she's warping the electromagnetic field of the planet to disrupt the established electrical grid so that the Prime Sentinels can erect a new one, which is interesting because Magneto takes a similar step at the end of this episode. Is he playing into what Bastion wants him to do? And then we see girders for the Golden Gate Bridge being floated into place by this mutant who has a Firebird outline. This is Rachel Summers, aka Ascani, Scott, and Jean's daughter from the dystopian Days of Future Past timeline. Technically Cable's half-sister. And of course the Golden Gate Bridge reminds us of the live-action Ian McKellen Magneto displacing it in 2006's X-Men The Last Stand. I would say this is San Francisco Bay, but once again, they seem to have redone the skyline, maybe moved some buildings from other cities to this spot. And if you look in the lower right of screen, there is a bridge that would geographically just be going off to nowhere into the ocean. Cable says that each time he's tried to stop the attack on Genosha, he's temporarily pulled away from the event. And Beast responds,
"Strange. The mystics of Kamartaj speak of absolute points, events that occur across all timelines."
Let's go! Okay, first off, I love that Beast preceded this by saying strange, as in, he might have had conversations with Stephen Strange himself. Dr. Strange does exist in the X-Men animated series continuity. He cameoed in Season 3, Episode 6, Phoenix Saga Part 4, Starjammers, and Season 3, Episode 18, Dark Phoenix Part 3, and then briefly at the Ski Chalet in Season 4, Episode 8, Nightcrawler. But Beast, of course, is referring to the What If Season 1, Episode 4, What If Dr. Strange lost his heart instead of his hands, in which Dr. Strange tries to loop back in time to save Christine Palmer over and over again until the Ancient One arrives to explain that Christine's death is an absolute point.
Her death is an absolute point in time.
Absolute.
Unchangeable. Unmovable.
Now, I'm fascinated by the concept of absolute points. In Sony's animated Spider-Verse, Miguel O'Hara refers to a similar concept by the term of canon event. And when I covered What If Season 1, I began to speculate that all kinds of events that we saw in MCU history could have been considered absolute points, like Tony Stark's death, or the Snap, or the Battle of New York. And I gotta say, it's validating to hear that the X-Men 97 team were on the same wavelength. The fact that Genosha might be an absolute point might explain why we saw the Watcher overseeing Genosha right before the attack. Again, DeMeo used the analogy of different trees shared leaves to explain X-Men 97's multiversal connection to the MCU multiverse. And the Watcher from What If ended Season 2 by showing Captain Carter the same Yggdrasil sacred timeline tree from Loki Season 2, so those stories were all connected, and I guess we could see the Watcher as a kind of leaf that could drift from one tree to the other tree to get a glimpse at this possible Genosha absolute point over on this other X-Men animated series tree. And on the X-Men animated series tree is also the 90s Spider-Man animated series. And maybe from this episode's cameos of Doom and Zemo, a couple other shows as well. We don't really know yet. Now, we don't know for sure if Genosha really will be an absolute point. It could just be Beast speculating. My theory is that whoever governs this multiverse tree saw what timeline manipulation and incursions did to the other tree, the MCU multiverse tree, and then decided to temporarily freeze any alterations to absolute points. And that could be why Bishop just kind of got bumped from out of time. The timeline ruler of this tree could be Immortus, aka Bender, aka Kang, who met Bishop in the Axis of Time in the Season 4 Beyond Good and Evil arc. Okay, so they see on the FC News the video footage of Charles Xavier announcing his betrothal to Lilandra on Chandalar. Last episode, Bastion said he hijacked a satellite feed where the signal was broadcast. And notice how the Chiron reads, "Scandal exposed." The events of Season 6 take place roughly the same time as Episode 7 and 8, which would explain why Storm hasn't caught up to everyone yet. But yes, we're seeing the fallout of this noble lie that the X-Men decided to tell the people of Earth, making a martyr figure out of Charles Xavier in order to just quell the conflict that was brewing when Kyrek attacked him. Then we get this establishing shot of Manhattan showing the World Trade Center towers. Yes, we are looking at 1997, those would still be there, but it is pretty interesting that the animators included this, as most other times in movies and shows that were produced after 2001 but set during the 90s. Like, it's just kind of weird for animators to storyboard these towers. towers. Used to be there. Now, we did see these towers at nighttime in the opening shot of episode 1, but obviously it just hits different to see these towers in the daytime. William Stryker is on WHIH on the TV ranting about how Charles Xavier might bring an alien army to Earth, and this is despite Charles taking the steps to educate the Shi'ar about the dangers of imperialism. In the original X-Men continuity, William Stryker is not a military colonel, he's Reverend Stryker. He's a televangelist like Billy Graham, and he has no connection to Wolverine really, but Brian Cox was just that good in X2 that most people think of the character as Colonel Stryker. I was piloting Black Hawk missions in the jungles of North Vietnam while you were sucking your mom's tit at Woodstock, Kelly. You get one chance to make a first impression, and if you're running a website that means you'll need a professional looking website, lucky for you, that's super easy to do thanks to Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform that provides you with everything you need to do whatever you need with your website. Squarespace is a massive asset library with everything you could possibly need, whether you're building your first website or polishing up what you've already got. Squarespace makes it super easy to customize your look, update content, and add features to make your website work exactly the way you want it to. For instance, Squarespace makes it easy to sell merch. You can design your products, then save time and money by letting Squarespace handle the production, inventory, and shipping. And if you're selling any other kind of physical goods, digital goods, or even a service, Squarespace makes it easy to build your storefront and grow your business. Head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/newrockstars to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Jean Grey telepathically comforts Rogue while Nightcrawler drops this wisdom.
Memories are merely dim images echoing with emotion. Does it matter if you heard his first cries? If you remember how it felt to hear them?
It's true. Research has shown that our memories are not objective recordings of history, but rather us remembering how we felt the last time we thought about an event. So if Jean shares that emotional connection to Cable with Madeline, why shouldn't she feel like a mother to him? Nightcrawler says,
I was abandoned by my mother Mystique as an infant. Then I met Rogue years later. We could have been enemies or strangers. Instead, unlike our mother, we chose not to abandon each other.
Yes, he calls Mystique his mother here, which she originally was, with Azazel being his father. But this was changed in the recent X-Men Blue Origins #1, which established that Mystique had shapeshifted into a male form and was Nightcrawler's father, with the entity Destiny being his mother. But here, back in 1997, this series is staying true to the original continuity. Nightcrawler finishes by saying,
Blood is blood. Family is a choice.
I just love this concept. It's also the idea James Gunn was playing with in the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy. Family truly is a social construct that may be rooted in genetic ties, but as our species has evolved, human beings are communal social creatures. It truly takes a village. Our sense of community reaches beyond those who are just related to us. The reason we get triggered by the sound of a baby crying on an airplane, even when it's not our kid, is because we are evolutionarily hardwired to worry about the safety of the tribe from threats in the night, and a baby crying alerts possible predators in the jungle to our position. So Darwinian survival of the fittest comes from the idea of family being a choice. We're more powerful if we are looking out for and have people looking out for us who aren't necessarily just the ones that are related to us. Okay, so Val Cooper chats with Sinister.
Bastion's very own Dr. Mengele.
I knew Mengele. He could have been so much more, but he settled on being a Nazi pup.
Good God! So Josef Mengele was the Nazi scientist who cruelly experimented on Jewish prisoners at Auschwitz, who's known as the Angel of Death, and he fled to Argentina in 1949. He evaded extradition and capture until he drowned after suffering a stroke in 1979. So apparently Sinister knew this guy, which is a big yikes. It suggests that Sinister, who originated as Nathaniel Essex in Victorian London, aided these 20th century eugenics movements. We see Magneto pinned up, mostly naked, in this X configuration. They're recreating the cover of Uncanny X-Men 251 when Wolverine is displayed this way when he's the captive of Donald Pierce. And I know Magneto has always been this ripped in the animated series, but you know, at this point, yeah, animators, you're not even trying to hide your kinks. We see what you're doing. So Cooper sees Magneto's Auschwitz tattoo. 214782 is what Magneto's number was when he showed his tattoo in 2006's X-Men The Last Stand, and it comes from the first time we saw his tattoo in the comics, 1982's Uncanny X-Men 161, but it was changed from 214782 to the 5-digit 24005 in Excalibur Volume 3 because that would be more accurate to what real-world victims of Auschwitz actually had tattooed on them. Reporter Trish Tilby visits Beast with a tray of Kate's Coffees, which is an actual coffee location in Marvel Comics located across the street from S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters in New York City. Beast says that the Sentinel form of Bolivar Trask was hoisted by his own petard, which is a reference to Shakespeare's Hamlet when Hamlet tells Gertrude in Act 3, Scene 4, "For 'tis the sport to have the engineer hoist with his own petard." discard, which really just means to be done in by one's own creation, a kind of poetic justice. At Bastion's old neighborhood in Harmony, Pennsylvania, Jean psychically refills the missing wheel of a tricycle that has the word zero on it, perhaps the beginnings of Operation Zero Tolerance. Inside the home is this box containing a Stark Expo magazine, where we see a kid with glasses operating a robot. There's also a toy robot that looks like a Sentinel, but this is actually a Marvel character named Machine Man, who has an extendable arm. And then we also see a framed photo of a young Sebastian. And then another box nearby has a reference book that's labeled X to M52, which I thought might be a nod to Uncanny X-Men number 52 from 1968, which is like a Mesmero, Erik the Red, and Android Magneto storyline, but I'm not sure if it's connected to this. So Cable finds this photo of young Sebastian and his parents. And this might be the craziest Easter egg of this episode, because this guy and this woman both showed up all the way back in the 90s in the season 4 One Man's Worth storyline, when Bishop joins the alternate timeline Wolverine and Storm to go back to May 11th, 1959 to stop Fitzroy and Nimrod's assassination of Charles Xavier. And at one point they visit this bar with a racist bartender and this waitress, who herself is kind of a racist little snitch, who tattles on Wolverine and Storm for holding hands and gets this whole fight started. So his mother was this waitress. Meanwhile, Bastion's father, who we see wears a uniform with the name tag Richard or Richards, also shows up in the One Man's Worth episodes. He's the dude in a leather jacket. It's so crazy to me that the X-Men 97 team went back to those episodes and randomly selected these two background characters, the way Nimrod with his like pink technical parts would just kind of inchworm their way over and latch on to whoever was closest to the action. Jean finds Bastion's drawing of the Xavier school that's on fire that Madeline had envisioned back in episode 1 when she entered Gyric's mind, when we saw a child's hand drawing this with a purple Yekrola crayon. So Jean puts all the pieces together. When those X-Men had fought Nimrod in 1959 in One Man's Worth, whenever they broke apart his android body, it would crawl itself back together. And now we see those leftover pieces of Nimrod had slithered over to new human hosts and then infected their bodies, rewrote their DNA, and produced a living techno-organic youth offspring named Sebastian. Now this is a change from Bastion's origin in the OZT comics, where Bastion thinks he was born a normal man to Rose Gilberti, but his memories are unblocked as he realizes that he's actually an android, the fusion of Master Mold and Nimrod. Jean just kind of simplifies all of this by saying,
he's descended of every Sentinel from Master Mold to Nimrod.
I will say, I think this alteration works because Bastion's birth and his aging process is real. We see him aging in the normal X-Men history that all these characters live through, and it's not just some false memory plugged into an android's mind. In this way, it's creepier. We see how like technology nanobites infect a human body so much that he can use them as vessels to reproduce. He used them as flesh puppets to make them dancing, drinking wine, making love. Meanwhile, Bastion speaks to other world leaders involved with OZT, and at his side is Daria, who in the comics is a Prime Sentinel who looks like a young girl and shaves her head, and initially she helps Bastion carry out OZT, but she ends up switching sides to help Jubilee. Bastion reveals that he orchestrated the Genosha attack to overload humanity's bandwidth and to paralyze them with apathy. And then we get some crazy cameos.
Do not mistake Doom's collusion as indifference to flagrant war crimes.
Next time I'll send memos.
Dr. freaking Doom! Actually, in the credits, he's voiced by Ross Marquand, and he's listed only as Latverian OZT member. His look with the mask and the lines that are inside the mouthpiece look like the Dr. Doom from the Fantastic Four animated series from 1994. And then another cameo.
Your Sentinel program can't go wide so long as leaders like President Kelly see the X-Men as allies.
This, of course, is Baron Zemo! That's right, let's do the dance! And notice how here he has the same lined mask and this crown as the Zemo in the Avengers United They Stand series from 1999. Now, both this 1999 series and the Fantastic Four 1994 series were considered to be removed from the continuity that was shared between the X-Men and the Spider-Man 90s animated series. But now with these cameos, who knows? Now, there's this other female character.
We also request Dr. Cooper stay with you to ensure those memos go out.
I was thinking this might be Madame Mask, maybe Madame Hydra, but Bo DeMeo did clarify that this is just a human UN nation leader involved with the OZT, and that not everyone up here is like a famous superhero. Most of them are just world leaders. Bastion explains to Cooper that Genosha was a matter of time management to stall the growth of the mutant population to give themselves time to supplant humans with a Prime Sentinel techno-organic virus. He cites the hole in the ozone layer, which was a very big deal in the 90s, folks, and Bastion says,
builders lay off a dozen workers and hire one mutant with the strength of 10 men.
It's interesting interesting to remember that in X-Men Season 1, Episode 8, The Unstoppable Juggernaut, when the X-Men first meet Colossus on a construction site, he has, in fact, taken the job of 10 men. Meanwhile, Bastion's mother shows them his creepy painting from when he was 16 that he called The Final Dream. It shows a multi-faced master mold and prime sentinels like dark angels apocalyptically ruling over mutant slaves. The Final Dream is likely a nod to Hitler's Final Solution, the Nazi codename for the genocide of Jews in World War II. The fact that as a kid, Bastion was foreseeing this future just tells us that much of his programming came from Nimrod and everything Nimrod would know about what the future would bring and every connection Nimrod had with Master Mold. But then this old woman's body contorts freakishly into a Prime Sentinel android. You might be reminded of the Hilda Backshot scene with the snake in Deathly Hallows, but Bo DeMeo did say that that is not what they had in mind. Jubilee and Roberto meanwhile shop at Wasserman's, a nod to Ron Wasserman, the composer of the original 90s X-Men theme song, despite Chaim Saban getting the legal credit for it in the credits of every episode. Jubilee's outfit of the black suit with the pink collar is her look from the 2011 Wolverine and Jubilee storyline. Beast calibrates Cerebro to track humans who have been infected, and then this might have been what actually triggered the awakening of all these Prime Sentinels, because they could have attacked at any time, and it kind of seems like they were all programmed with just some kind of trigger that when some kind of Cerebro technology tried to detect them, that's when to go crazy. And we see them all over the world, including freaking Trish Tilby. So Robo Trish stomps her heel into Beast's chest, and after Deathbird stomping her heel into Ronin's cheek in episode 6, you X-Men 97 animators, come on, we see what you're doing. So Morph morphs into Juggernaut, but they are no match for Robo Trish. Nightcrawler bamps Morph and Wolverine to safety, and they crash into the next room that's filled with antiquities like a sarcophagus and Japanese armor and a few sabers that are right over Kurt's head and clatter at his feet. Jubilee and Roberto flee the Sentinels in this mall, passing stories like Jam Jam Juice instead of Jamba Juice and Fashion Forever instead of Forever 21. And Jubilee says, "I'm so done with malls," a line that I love because malls really grew in popularity in the 80s, arguably peaked in the 90s, and then at that point they just began to decline. And from here forward, Jubilee is going to be like, it was this moment that started it. And poor Jubilee, back in Night of the Sentinels, she did go to an arcade, and that's where the Sentinels first got her. She just has bad luck trying to do fun teenager stuff. Meanwhile, of the humans protesting outside, half of them turn into Prime Sentinels and then blast off, and I love the confused looks of the uninfected humans' faces. And we get some real Wolverine action this episode.
Fancy a trip to the junkyard, Tin Woman?
Haha, in the 1992 pilot Night of the Sentinels Part 2, Wolverine sees the Sentinel for the first time and he says, "Hey, Tin Woodsman," with the same inflection that he does here.
Hey, Tin Woodsman, I'm sending you back to Oz in pieces.
And I just love the idea that since Logan is so old, Wizard of Oz is probably one of the first movies he saw, and he just loves this reference. It's kind of like Steve Rogers in the 2012 Avengers movie when someone brings up the flying monkeys.
You don't understand.
I do. I understood that reference.
But Wolverine, who cannot fly, remember, falls through the sky and just wants to slash as many Prime Sentinels as he can on the way down, not caring that these things were just 5 seconds ago people. He slices one in half, he slices another's arm off, he decapitates another one, he slices another half, and then he crashes through all the floors of the X-Mansion like he's a freaking Aristocat. Then we get this really creepy shot of Rogue sleeping from the outside where we see some Prime Sentinels just silently standing in the room staring at her, but then Wolverine intervenes.
Why resist the inevitable?
Lady, I got 6 reasons why.
No, mein Freund. Nein.
It's such a good bit because not only does Kurt have a third blade with his tail, making a total of 9 with Wolverine's claws, 9 is a German word for no. So he's also kind of saying, "No, madam, no." But this woman's severed arm crawls beside her like Thing in the Addams Family. And since this is 1997, who knows? All these people may have just watched the Addams Family and the Addams Family Values. Wolverine and Nightcrawler snicked and bamf through whatever nearest enemy they can get their hands on. But when they see that these things can just reassemble their parts, Nightcrawler adapts and he begins bamfing the foes out of the vicinity, which I thought was so clever. And then in one of the sickest shots I've ever seen Marvel pull in any title, Wolverine sinks his claws into the sky, the precise moment the Nightcrawler bamfs, and we see the teleportation from Logan's point of view as his arms distort as Kurt is pulling him through the Brimstone dimension. And on the other side of that, Kurt just turns around completely unfazed because this is just a transference he makes hundreds of times a day. And I love this sub-storyline of the Summers family road trip as the family family flies a Blackbird jet. Jean so mom-ishly puts a seatbelt on Cable, but these Prime Sentinels wreck the jet engine, and Scott and Jean reference that this is yet another Blackbird that they've crashed this season. Scott flies out of the exploding jet in a blue Porsche. Its license plate reads SL1M, and Slim is one of Scott's nicknames. It looks a lot like the blue sports car that Scott had, and remember that Wolverine drove with Rogue and Bobby and Pyro and X2? That was a Mazda RX-8 with the X enlarged by Mazda because they knew it was going to be in an X-Men movie. And since this is such like a James Bond 007 type sequence, the Newton brothers created this version of Ron Wasserman's score that was kind of 007 themed, and you hear some choir vocals in there too. Roberto and Jubilee crash Nina's party and notice the banner reads humans for Genosha. And even the wording of that is shitty because mutants are still humans. And it's just so sad to see Nina give up her own son to authorities and then cruelly shut the doors behind him like she's locking him back in the closet from out of her mind. Meanwhile, Bastion's car rides into frame with an Atlas hood ornament, looking a lot like the arrival of Red Skull's V-16 coupe in Captain America: The First Avenger. In Greek mythology, Atlas picked the wrong side in a war between the gods and the Titans and was punished for it. And he's always depicted holding the weight of the world on his back. And that's probably how Bastion sees himself, propping up all of human civilization. And if you were to ask him at any point about Ayn Rand, he'd be like, yes, I've read Atlas Shrugged. He sees the X-Mansion destroyed, which is the vision from his drawings. I guess he can teleport, and he returns to his lab to punish Valerie Cooper for releasing Magneto. Cooper tells Bastion, Magneto knows us better than Charles ever did, knows we know better, that most of us experience tragedies like Genosha as a bit of deja vu before getting on with our day. But the scariest thing about Genosha wasn't the death or the chaos, it was a thought. The only sane thought that you can have when you're being chased by giant robots who are sent to crush you. And part of what makes her speech so effective is that it's voiced by Catherine Disher, who, in addition to doing a great job as Valerie Cooper this season, was the original voice of Jean Grey in the 90s series. And she's just bringing so much weight to this. And the speech finishes with these 3 words.
Magneto was right.
Enough.
So the phrase Magneto was right is a common phrase that dates back to the new X-Men comics of the early 2000s. After X-Men died on Genosha and the E is for Extinction storyline, mutants like Kid Omega started wearing shirts with the slogan, Magneto was right would later be the name of a 2023 comic miniseries. We see Magneto going to the North Pole, hijacking the planet's innate magnetism to shut down all electronic devices. We see Magneto do this in the Fatal Attraction comic, and it is awesome. I love how you can actually see a bit of Aurora Borealis glimmering following each of his yellow waves. Oh, but wait a minute, Aurora Borealis?
Good Lord, what is happening in there?
Aurora Borealis?
Aurora Borealis. At this time of year, at this time of day, in this part of the country, localized entirely within your kitchen.
Yes.
May I see it?
No.
And as the world electrical grid blacks out, look out! Who let Spider-Man in the house? Holy shit, it's Spider-Man! Bo DeMeo confirmed that this is indeed the Daniel Barnes Spider-Man from the 1994 animated series. As I said before, that show and the 90s X-Men animated series did share continuity. We saw an early shot this season mentioning Peter Parker and Eddie Brock on a Daily Bugle newspaper, but in the 90s X-Men series, the only real sighting we had of Peter was just his hand reaching into frame whipping in Season 3, Episode 7, Phoenix Saga Part 5, Child of Light. But in the 90s Spider-Man series, the X-Men did show up in a storyline. Then we see a shot of Silver Samurai. Past episodes of the season have hinted at him with sightings of a Yashida billboard, but the Silver Samurai appeared in Season 4, Episode 15, Lotus in the Steel. And then onto a Russian nuclear plant with Omega Red. Omega Red appeared in Season 2, Episode 4, Red Dawn, and Season 4, Episode 2, Deal with the Devil. What's most worrisome here is that this nuclear plant shuts down suddenly, and we see the guys in the control room freaking out. If you watch Chernobyl, you know that if the power grid that supplies energy to a nuclear plant suddenly cuts off, these plants are designed to hopefully have backup generators to keep everything operating for a few minutes until things can switch over so that the plant's nuclear reaction would be supplying its own energy. But if that switch happens too fast, it could trigger what happened at Chernobyl, a full meltdown, as the reactor core would be unable to regulate the reaction with control rods. And when that happens, boom! And this isn't just me speculating some doom and gloom, because when he was asked whether Magneto would have killed people in like falling aircrafts or power plants going offline, Bo DeMeo confirmed that is exactly what happened here. Magneto could have caused thermonuclear meltdowns in every power plant. And also, Cable is part machine. I'm a bit worried about him. That might be why Charles's Shi'ar ship crashes, because it might have been caught in that electromagnetic blast. It lands in the flaming ruins of the X-Mansion, and Charles says,
I hope that I'm not too late. To me, my X-Men,
and we see images of Beast and Jean and Cyclops and Storm in her new look from episode 6 appearing. But hold up, Jean's hair is down. Is he reaching out to Madeline? Could Madeline still be alive in some form? Charles might indeed be too late though, because this season has declared Magneto was right. Scott trying to follow Charles's vision and hope for a better future by sending his son to it, like Moses, only blew up in their faces when it led to Bastion and the Prime Sentinel technology. And now it could be argued that Magneto's Fatal Attraction move set up the Prime Sentinels to do exactly what they would use Polaris to do. Now, Bo DeMeo also wanted us to watch the season 1 penultimate episode, The Final Decision, in which we learn that Master Mold can print Sentinels made of plastics. And the biggest threat to mutant kind is an American society and government who wants them dead, who views them as second-class citizens. So now that everyone's gonna have to line up at Crazy Eddie's for new beepers, politicians like Graydon Creed are gonna know who to blame, and there's some plastic Sentinels out there that Bastion's gonna be able to command to finish the job. Hey, real quick before we move on, Nerd Riot has a special line of Star Wars shirts coming out for May the 4th. We have a ton of awesome custom designs showing off Imperial helmets, Padme, an Ewok snapback hat, and so many more. Click the link in the description below or head to nerdriot.shop to get your May the 4th Star Wars merch today. And if you sign up for our mailing list, then every purchase enters you in a contest to win a replica lightsaber from Own a Saber. Comment down below with your thoughts on this episode of X-Men 97. Follow me at EA Voss. Subscribe to all 3 channels on the New Rockstars Network for breakdowns and news coverage of everything you love. Thanks for watching. Bye.